Any classroom links, you contact admin only, right? Anybody? Classroom links, contact you admin only, right? So last session we discussed about how do we create Angular application and workspace. So were you able to create these two things? Have you done that? So we learned about two things: creating Angular workspace and creating Angular application. So in a workspace, we have to use the command ng new workspace and create application. You have to set it to false. Create application, we need to set it to false. Yeah. Next, creating application. After you created ng generate application and any name, you have to define that. So we discussed about these two things: Angular workspace and Angular application. Now we will discuss the application structure, how the application works. Yesterday we discussed about the file structure of workspace. So after creating workspace, we created a application. When you created application in the workspace, these all folders we discussed, these all files purpose we learned. Now once you create a new Angular application, you will get these projects extra added into that. Now in the projects, again you are having the project that we created, that is shopping is the project. And in this project, you can see you will have src, browser, karma config, ts config, spec config. So already I explained the basic points traditionally what a project contains in the beginning of creating TypeScript project. There you learned two folders will be very common, public and src. Public contains static resources and src contains all dynamic resources. So here after creating application, here we will see application file system. What actually application contains inside. In the application file system, you can see here so many options. I will give file or folder and description. So what are the basic things that you will see in a project? In the application file system, you have a file. You can see we have src folder, src. So it comprises of dynamic resources. It comprises of dynamic resources. src contains all dynamic resources. Next, dynamic resources, we will keep what are present inside src, we will see first. So this is the file system of projects. In the projects, your project is shopping. In that directly you will find src. After that, you can see there is browser list rc. We have a file called browsers list rc. Actually, it configures the supported browsers for application. That means you can restrict browsers, because when you are developing a web application, always browser dependency. That means in some browsers, some options will not work. In some browsers, they will work. I hope you know already this in HTML. When you learned HTML tags, you might have learned which tag is not suitable for all browsers. Some tags not cannot work on other browsers. You might have learned issue in web development. So when you are developing any web application, we can also restrict browsers. That means we can tell users which browser is suitable for this application. What are the browsers supported? Those lists you can maintain inside browsers list. Browsers list, it configures the supported browsers for application. You can see in the browsers list file, you can see these are all the supported browsers. And you will see that in the current list of browsers. So the Internet Explorer is removed. No more Internet Explorer because Internet Explorer is now dead. There is no Internet Explorer browser. So the modern applications cannot run properly on Internet Explorer. So here browsers list what are the browsers supported. So that information you can configure inside browsers list. There is another file. So karma, this is con config.js, conf.js. Yeah. Karma conf.js, it is nothing but it comprises of testing framework configuration. That means Angular comes with a testing framework called Jasmine Karma, and that framework related configurations we define here. That means Angular uses a testing framework internally, and the testing framework name is Jasmine. And Jasmine uses Karma as a framework for testing, and all the testing related configurations are defined here. That means what to test, from where to start the test, which command to run test, all such configuration about testing are defined in Karma config, right? So testing configuration is defined in this file. In this file, we define testing configuration. So Karma config, it contains the Jasmine framework, which is used for testing, configuring the testing framework for our application. This is known for the people who are aware of testing. At the end, we will see how testing is done. There we will discuss. So testing configuration is present here. Another option, tsconfig.app.json. Already we know tsconfig. We have two tsconfig, one at workspace level, another one at application level. You know the meaning of that. Application level means, so it configures rules for TypeScript used in current app. If you want to configure rules for all projects, then you have to define in workspace. That means tsconfig is present in two locations. Here we have, here also we have. This is related to workspace. This is related to workspace. That means here if you set rules, they will work for all applications. But sometimes some applications have different TypeScript rules. Such things you can define inside tsconfig app.json. That is. So another option, you can see tsconfig.spec.json. Anywhere the spec file is a test file, So that means it is used for testing. Anywhere you see the suffix spec, that means it is a test file. So whatever settings you configured in tsconfig, you can test those settings using this spec. But for that, you need awareness on testing. You need to know what is testing, how testing is done. Okay. So what is difference between Karma and this spec file. This is configuration of testing, and this is testing only this file. Which file we are testing? ts config. In that, whatever is written, that we are testing. So for that, there is a separate test file defined here, right? These are the contents that you can see at outer part of your application. You can see application contains all these things: src, browser list, karma config, ts config, and ts config spec.json. Others are related to workspace. Already we know that. We discussed about them in last session. Now, inside src, what are present? Inside src, let's see. When you open this src folder, you can see inside src again so many are there. Inside src again so many things are present. Now let's go into that and discuss. That means project resources. Project resources are present in again src folder. In src folder, you can see what are present. So file, folder, and description. Let's see what are present in src folder. You can see what are the contents in src folder here. In src folder, you have again app, assets, environments. Actually, app is nothing but it comprises of Angular application resources. Angular application resources like it contains Angular application resources like so components like services like pipes, like modules, all are present here. I told you yesterday that a framework is a combination of components, services, templates, pipes, modules. Application related all resources are present inside this app. If you want to create a template, you want to create a service, you want to create a pipe, you want to create a module, everything you have to create inside app. So app contains application resources. Assets, it comprises of static resources. Static resources like you can have your images, you can have your text documents, you can have your pdf documents, so you can have your audio video files, etc. All you can keep in assets. If your application is using any images, text documents, pdf documents, all such resources are kept in assets. Another, we have environments. Environments, it contains files required for configuring environments environments for application. What are the environments for application? Actually, I hope you already know, in real-time software development, entire software development happens in 4 servers actually. In real world software development, I hope you already know this, entire software development happens in 4 servers. We have 4 servers. Like we have a golden server, or we also called as sandbox. We have a sandbox. We have development server, and we have the quality server. We have quality server, and we have a production server. We have a production server. So entire software development usually happens in these 4 servers. And we have client. Client is the user who wants to use your application, client. Now, technically, I hope you already know in general software companies how the entire development happens. Sandbox server is actually repository server. That means all the project related resources, the library is present here. As a developer in software companies, you are given access to development server. In the development server, we usually build the application. Application is built in development server. After building the application in development server, we move this application to the quality server. In the quality server, testing will happen. Our testing team will test the application on quality. After testing, then if it is fine, then we will move to production server. Production server is the server which is live. That means our clients will be using the application from the production. So any software development includes all these phases: development, quality, and production. Development is the location where you design, quality where you test, and production where you make it live. As a software developer, you already know that when application moves from one server to another server, a lot of changes will happen. That means application and its code will not be in the same way how you have designed in development. Because when you move application to quality, you need to configure to quality. So when you move application to production, you have to configure to production. That means a lot of changes in the code, lot of changes in the configuration will happen when application is moving from one server to another. For example, I hope you know, suppose just basic example, let's take, suppose in a project you are using CSS and JavaScript. In a project you are using CSS JavaScript. As a developer, you already know that in development you have to use the files JS, the file CSS. But when you go to production, we don't use those files directly. We use file.min.js and file.min.css. You know that. These are the files for production. These are the files for production. So that means you know that in production, you cannot use these original JS and CSS files. We have to minify the files and use them in production. When application goes live, it uses that. That means so many changes will happen. Functionality will be same, but configuration, settings, and other aspects will change. So we have to design an application and we have to set configuration for every environment. How many environments are there? 3: development, quality, and production. In development, which CSS it should use, which script it should use. In production, which CSS it have to use and which JS it have to use. All these are defined inside this environments. Environments comprises of development and quality and production. So for those environment, whatever configurations are required, we generally define them inside this file. You can see in environments, this environment production is true. So environments, you see currently production is true. That means by default, the environment is suitable for here it is true and here it is false. That means this is for development. So when environment set for development, it will compile in a different way. It will process in a different way. It will use different files. When it is set for production, it will do in a different way. We will see that at the end. That means how we can make our project ready for production. How we build, how we debug, how we test, and how we deploy. So whatever settings are required from development to production, everything is defined in environments, right? Of course, as a web developer, you know favicon.ico, you know that, right? It is the favorite icon, fav icon for page. So your website have a favorite icon. Every websites usually have favorite icon, you know that. Another index.html, you know this also. What is it? It is the startup page in your application. So our application starts with which file? Index.html. Every web application have index.html. We have another important main.ts. What is the meaning of main in software programming? We have a technical term. What is main called as? Main called as. What is main called as? It is the index
Recording in progress.
which program to compile, which file to compile. After compiling, the output will come in index. The starting of compiling and processing is done by using this main.ts. It is the entry point. You can see in main, it is defining a option. I will tell you detailedly about this in the next architecture we will discuss. You see, if environment is production, then enable production mode, and platform browser dynamic bootstrap module is app. Bootstrap module is app module. We will discuss about that. This you are going to understand in next point architecture we will discuss. Here bootstrapping is nothing but bootstrapping is the process of, it is not CSS bootstrap. Bootstrapping is the process of converting the static DOM into dynamic. It is the process of converting static DOM into dynamic. I will explain that architecture we will see. So main indicates from which module to start with. That means our application is currently starting with a module called app module. It is the entry point. From there, the compilation starts. So that is important. Another option, this is polyfills. Polyfills.ts. We have to know about this file system and remember, because in many even experience level interviews also several questions are asked in this file system. That means because we can identify your experience levels by understanding your architectural knowledge. That means for freshers, the questions will be on concept, and for experienced people, the questions will be on architecture. That means, for example, for a fresher, the question will be like, what is a service? And for an experienced person, the question will be, what is the architecture of service? Means how service works, right? What is a service? Fresher, enough. That is enough for his level, right? But how service works, its architecture, that is experienced people. Anywhere, when you are facing interviews, we are preparing for interviews. As an experienced person, you have to be aware of architecture behind every concept, because the questions will be related to architectural level. Concept freshers, architecture experienced people. So polyfills is nothing but, so it is responsible for handling differential loading. It is responsible for handling differential loading. What is differential loading? That means actually differential loading is a technique. So is a technique. So used in application. So application to load the library that is compatible for browser. That is what actually differential loading is. Angular's one of the major advantages is it supports differential loading. Differential loading means actually we have browsers. Generally, we have browsers. For example, I will say dev. Generally, we have browsers. Actually, browsers are classified into two types. We have legacy browser and we have modern browsers. Two types of browsers will be there. Legacy browser means they support up to HTML4 version and they support up to JavaScript ES4. They are legacy browsers. Modern browser means they support HTML5 version and they support ES5 and higher, JavaScript ES5 and higher version. Now, generally what happens is a library is created. Now, this library is sent for modern browser and the same library is sent for legacy. Then if you designed for modern browser, some options will not work on legacy. That is regular problem in web development. Then generally what Angular can do is it can classify the library also two types. It can have legacy library, it can have a modern library. That means in Angular, library classified into two. If request is coming from a legacy library, means a legacy browser, then this library will be loaded. And if it is from modern, then this library will be loaded. That means according to the browser, the library version changes. That's very good. That means it reduces the compatibility issues. Browser compatibility issues can be reduced by using this concept, differential loading. Polyfills is responsible for loading the library that is suitable for that browser. That is very good. It reduces browser compatibility issues, right? Actually, polyfills is for that. You can see polyfills always tells about browser polyfills. Browser polyfills means it will load according to the browser. For that, whatever configurations are there, the configurations need to be defined here. As of now, no configurations. Later, once you make your application ready for production, build and make it ready for production, then polyfills will come to picture. Initially, it is all commented. So already I told you several files will be just initial stage. Later they will be keep on updating according to our environment. So polyfills responsible for that, right? Another file is there. So what is the purpose of this? It reduces browser compatibility issues. It reduces the browser compatibility issues. Next, we have styles.css. So it is it configures the global styles for application. That means whatever styles you mention here, they will be accessible to all components inside application. Every component can have separate styles. But if you want some styles for all component in a common way, those you can configure inside styles.css that contains global styles. Styles are nothing but CSS. So those are global styles. Okay. Next, important, you can see there is test.ts. Test.ts, it is nothing but it configures the test environment for quality. So you can say for quality server, test environment for quality server. On quality server, when you are trying to test, so what is the environment to configure? that is defined inside test.ts. That means which platform, so what to test, how to test, setting up all the test environment for the testing server is done here. Which framework to use for testing, it is mentioned in karma config. What to test inside application, that is decided in test.ts, right? What is present in this file? There is a file called karma config. It contains which testing framework to use, which version to use. In the testing framework, current application, what to test, that is defined in test.ts, right? That is the option. These are all present inside this folder. These are all the components of SRC. App, assets, environments, favicon, index HTML, main, polyfills, styles, and tests. Now we will see what is present. Actually, you can see environments already I showed you. Assets is empty actually. Nothing is there. It just contains git keep. So git keep is nothing but what are the static resources you need to keep for Git if you are publishing on Git. It contains images and all other things you can keep in assets. Now you have another point is what is present in this app folder. I told you that app contains all the components. Everything is present inside app. So, but when you see app contains some files here. Now in this, you need to understand only one file. Why? Because, so this is now project app folder. In project app folder, you should know that project app folder. So it comprises of a component by default. It comprises of a component by default. So that is a app component. We have an app component by default. That means every project have a component. By default, one component is present, and that component is app. And every component, actually, app component comprises of 4 files actually. It contains 4 files. .ts file, .html file, .css file, .spec.ts file. Spec.ts. TS file contains logic components. We will discuss detail, right? Here by default, every application comes with one component. What is that component? App. So you have every component have 4 files again. One TS file, it contains logic for component. Another HTML, it contains presentation, and CSS contains styles. Spec contains testing. That means component related testing is defined inside this file. So you don't need to worry about this because these you will learn now. We will discuss component files. So what is special is actually app folder contains so the file called app.module.ts. And you have observed that main.ts is using app module.ts for bootstrap. So it is using for bootstrap. It is using this app module for bootstrap. That means, what do you understand? That means application is starting with which file? App module.ts. Application started compiling from which file? App module.ts. Output comes in index. And compiling starts in app module.ts. And here, very important, if you know this point that application starts with app module, that means what you can understand by this? That means app module, app.module.ts contains all the library. Am I right? Library required for application, because application starts from here. So whatever library required for application is defined here. So what is app module is going to do? First, it is going to compile all the library required for application. After compiling the library required for application, then it will start with index. It will start with index if compiling is successful. So you can you can see this app module here. You can see it contains import. You know what is the meaning of import? That means it is importing library. After importing library, it have a lot of declarations. I will tell you. And it have an option called bootstrap. Which component? App component. Let's understand this architecture now, right? You will see how this works now. Actually, what happens is your Angular application means how it is going to work. We have an Angular application, and generally in this Angular application, yeah. So we have one Angular application. Yeah. Usually in this Angular application, so application starts with index. Yeah. So this is your Angular application. And as I already told you, application is built with components. For example, we have components like login. We have component like home. We have component like register. Like this, some components are present. And actually, every component contains presentation, styles, logic, everything is present in a component. Now, what happens is here we have browser. On the browser, we are requesting this application. This is browser. On browser, when you request this application is requested on browser. When you request this application on browser, usually Angular application is currently running on your local server, http://localhost 4200. That is the default port number for your Angular app. You can change port numbers your wish. Default, every Angular application in any machine by default runs on this location. Now, when you request this on browser, first what happens is inside the browser. This inside the browser, it loads static DOM. You know DOM. Static DOM means document object model. It loads the static DOM. It first loads the static DOM. First, all the DOM structure is loaded. That means there is a button, there is a text box, there is some element. All are loaded, but they are not functioning. They are not working. That is static. Static DOM means all the contents are loaded, but they are not functioning. Button click not working. So drop down change not working. But there is a button, there is a drop down, everything is loaded. After loading the static DOM, now what happens inside Angular application is here. In the Angular application, so first main.ts will come. This main.ts is going to first load a file called, it is going to load one file. And what is the file loaded by main.ts? Main.ts file is going to load a file called app.module.ts. That means this file contains information about what library is used. The entire library will be compiled. But in this library, in this app module, there is one option called bootstrap. So this bootstrap is defined. Bootstrap indicates which component to start. In this bootstrap, we have home component. That means now application starts with which component? Home. It will start with home component. Then what happens is, actually currently we don't have all these components. Currently in application, we are having which component? App. In our empty project that we created, by default, it contains one component called app. And that component is set in bootstrap. That means application starts with which component? App. Now what happens here is, whatever the component you have configured, that means bootstrap. Now this component will be loaded into index page. That means now you have index page. So we have index.html page. This index.html loads which component onto its screen. This index, it loads which component? It loads home component. And this index page is now delivered to your application. It is delivered to your application. That means this is delivered to your application. That means now on the screen, you can see which page. We can see index.html page. In index.html page, which component you can see? Home component. And because it is already compiled, right? You made a request here, right? When you made a request here, the response also came here. You made a request and the response went. Now what happens after compiling this static DOM? After compiling, this static DOM is converted into dynamic DOM. After compiling, this static DOM is now converted into dynamic DOM. That means before compiling, when it first time loads, that is static. After compiling, whatever it loads, that is dynamic. That means after compiling, now it can start interacting. So it can start interacting to your instructions. Now the process of the converting static DOM into dynamic DOM, this process is called bootstrapping. Bootstrap is different. Bootstrapping is different. Bootstrapping in Angular is the process of converting static DOM into dynamic. Actually, we generally say computer is booting, means it is getting ready so that you can start interacting with it. So application is booting. That means it is making it ready. And once bootstrap is finished, now you can start interacting with the application. So that is the reason you observe carefully this file. In the app module.ts file, you can see bootstrap is app component. That means application starts with which component? App component. And you can see it is having providers. Providers indicate what are the services you want to use. That means if your application is using any services, those services are registered in providers. If your application is using any modules, those modules are registered in imports. What if your application is using any components, pipes, factories, and others, all are defined in declaration. That means app module contains, actually app module comprises of following specifications. It contains following specifications. So one is, what are the specifications it is having? One is declarations. Declarations is an array. That means it is a set of components, pipes, factories, pipes, and factories. Yeah. And factories used for application. All the components, pipes, services, whatever pipes, factories, components are required for application, they are defined here. Another one, we have providers. Providers is nothing but it is a set of services. It is a set of services. All your Angular services are defined in providers. And you have imports. Imports is a set of modules. It is a set of modules. So what is a module? Already we learned, right? It is a collection of again several components, services, classes, templates, everything present inside module. Next we have bootstrap. Bootstrap, it defines the components to start with. You can start with multiple components because every modern application is comprising of lot of components. For example, you see some websites like, suppose you see Amazon. This is component based application. This Amazon is also component based. Amazon is completely designed in React.js. Amazon, Instagram, Netflix, these are all designed in Instagram. So they are designed in React.js. They are in the React.js. Now, all are component based actually. Component based means you can see this at the top. This is called header component. And this is navbar component. Navbar component. I hope you know the name of this component. The banner. What is that component? Carousel. Its name is carousel. Carousel is a very popular component used in web development. Carousels. We call them carousels. I hope you know the name of these components, white boxes. What are these? Those white boxes. They are card components. We call them cards. This is basic in web development. At Angular level, you cannot see surprisingly. Right? What is this? He's talking something new. Right? These are very basic things in web designing. A website usually contains header, footer, cards, carousels, navbars. All these are components. Means an application is designed with components. You are looking at me as if I am talking about some space research and all. These are basics in web development, right? Every website have a collection of all these components. You learned Bootstrap, na? Will you design a navbar by yourself manually? No, we don't waste time. Ready-made navbars are present. Will you design a carousel manually? No, we don't. Ready-made carousels are present. We just implement them, customize. Right? Application is a collection of components. Lot of components. All these are component based. Component based. What is advantage of this component based is you can easily reuse the components. For example, see, suppose I showed you Netflix. In Netflix, we have the header component, and you see this is register component. This is register component. And I want this register component somewhere bottom again. Then will you design 2 times, copy paste? That is not great idea, right? You want a login screen at 2 locations, then you will not copy paste that login code 2 times. Then how? We design a component and we use that component anywhere we want, reuse the components. Actually, it's not a new concept. For example, see, component based is very familiar in general HTML also. See, suppose I am creating a simple demo.html page. In this, I designed here input type is equal to date. I'm using input type date. Let's run this. And you can see, I will go to the settings here, right? Developer tools, I will go here. You see, actually, when I go here we have an option, right? I don't know. Yeah. You see, actually, when you look at this design, when you look at this, you can observe clearly here that